Good Sunday evening, everybody. I'm meteorologist Tim Pandajis here with a tropical update. It's been quite a while since we've spoken about tropical activity because we've gone nearly a month without a named system out in the Atlantic Basin. There's no named system out there right now, but there is growing potential that we could have one in the coming days out of one of these two invests, both 93 and 94L in the Atlantic Basin. All right, here's the latest. As I just mentioned, it's been 30 days since the last advisory on Hurricane or Tropical Storm Elsa was issued by the National Hurricane Center. Since then, we've been in quite the dry spell out there, but there are signals pointing towards a return to a more active Atlantic Basin. We are getting into the climatological peak of the season, mid-August and onwards, to the peak of the season actually on September 10th. Now, there are two current invests to monitor. Before we go any further, you might be asking yourself, what in the world is an invest? Well, invest is short for investigative area, and then the number after is just 90 to 99. It cycles through and then repeats. That's just to mainly keep track of the systems out there. And the L that follows the number just designates that it in fact is in the Atlantic Basin. If it was, say, in the Eastern Pacific, it would have an E after it. And on our tropical vocabulary pyramid, it's about halfway up. What comes next? Well, a potential tropical cyclone, or more likely a tropical depression, and then maybe getting a name, and that would be a tropical storm onwards from there. I want to start things off before we talk about the Atlantic, about what's going on in the Pacific Basin. Extremely active. In fact, we've got a tropical storm out there right now, Kevin, that's on its way to becoming the fourth hurricane in that basin. It's been extremely active there, and why that matters for the Atlantic is a typical rule of thumb is when the Pacific is very active, the Atlantic is not. Models are pointing to the Pacific starting to quiet down in about the next 7 to 10 days, and then the Atlantic perking back up. Now, why does that happen? Well, overall, the atmosphere has these circulations. There's rising motion and there's sinking motion. Rising motion is conducive to storm development. That's what's happening in the Pacific right now. But there has to be corresponding sinking motion, and that is what's been happening in the Atlantic. By no means is that the only reason why we haven't had any activity. We've had the Saharan air layer that's been keeping it like a dust bowl out there in most of the Atlantic. And also some wind shear has been up there as well, and a lot of that could be coming from the storm activity that's been happening in the Pacific. Look at what's been going on there. They're up to Kevin. These four storms have happened in the last 10 days, and Linda is actually modeled to occur in the next couple of days too. So we could have 5 storms, named storms in the Pacific in 10 days amount of time. Now in the Atlantic, on the other hand, things are starting to point to more activity. We're starting to see thunderstorm activity organize itself and try to develop into some sort of tropical system. Moderate chances now on 2 investigative areas, 93 and 94. Yesterday we had 92 as well, which was farther off towards the east, but that has kind of fallen apart within the last 24 hours. 94L is going to be the storm or the system that we're going to keep a closer eye on here as we look at the modeling going out further in time. So let's start with that system right now. The current information on it, we're going off the 7 o'clock advisory. There's no track put out from the Hurricane Center because it is not a named system yet. It is moving at around 15 miles per hour, has winds of 30 miles per hour, but as you look at it here on satellite imagery, I mean, it's not terribly impressive. We're seeing some thunderstorm activity. By the way, infrared here shows us the temperatures of the cloud tops. When you start to get some of the black shading, some whites popping up in there, some pretty cold cloud tops, meaning pretty high thunderstorm, strong thunderstorm activity, but it's not organizing around a center, nor are we really seeing any good spin, at least on this imagery. When I switch it up and show you visible, we got to go back like 12 hours because, of course, the sun is setting there and then it goes to darkness. But in the last couple of frames here, you can certainly start to see some semblance of some rotation there. And that's why the Hurricane Center has this now at 60% chance at developing within the next 5 days. So what's going on with it that's going to help it? Well, it's got very warm water temperatures. We need 80 degrees Fahrenheit or warmer. We've got that, 82, 83, 84 degrees, so that's not really a problem. Wind shear is not factoring in very much. It's very light. However, the good old Saharan air layer that's been pretty much putting the kibosh on the entire Atlantic for the last month, it's still out there. It has retreated a little bit farther to the north, but you can still see it on water vapor imagery here. That's the rust color here off to the north, and a lip of that is trying to get nosed down in out ahead of 94L. Now, the possibility here is that that can get entrained into the circulation and choke it off. Tropical systems are moist heat engines. They need the moist tropical air to kind of sustain themselves. And when you get dry air sucked in, chokes it off and kind of stalls out any development. A cool way to show you this is, I don't think I've shown you this before, but this is PWAT'S, tropical moisture. Now, PWAT'S, precipitable water values, is basically you take the column of air from the surface all the way up to 30,000 feet. You compress it, and the amount of water in that air column is the precipitable water value. Now, when you're getting colors in the orange shade here, that's extremely tropical moist air. You're getting PWAT values 2, 2 1/4, 2.5 inches. When you compress that air down, you get 2.5 inches of water, of liquid. Now, when you have the blue shading there, that's much drier air. So that indicates the Saharan air layer. And notice as we go out in time, modeling it out to, say, Tuesday night, you're starting to see some of that dry air getting pulled in and entrained into the circulation. Now, there is the possibility, and we've seen it time and again, that these storms can do a good job of walling themselves off and not being influenced by any of that dry air. So that's yet to be seen, but it is a possibility, and we're going to have to watch that dry air to kind of chokehold this thing out and not let it develop. Now, on the other hand, we've got 93L. This is the storm right behind it. This also doesn't look very impressive, but when you look at it on the infrared, you've got a burst of thunderstorm activity that looks to be pretty well organized, but that's why I plotted where the last center is. Notice the center is located off to the east of where the convection is. This is getting influenced by some wind shear out of the northeast, and I'll throw on visible again. We got to go back in time 12 hours, but I think in the last few frames you can see it. It's a little more evident there. You've got the low-level center and all the convection displaced off to the south and west. So likelihood of this developing is moderate. It's still in that range of 30 to 40%, but it is lower and less likely than what we find with 94L. And of course, it's flanked on all sides pretty much with that dry Saharan air. So it's got a lot more working against it developing. Now, I just want to reiterate that by no means is the environmental conditions amazingly conducive to tropical development. It's not dry and dusty for the most part, but a lot of that dust is retreated north, and we're seeing tropical waves, a monsoon trough developing here, and that's driving some moisture farther north and allowing some sort of semblance of development. Nothing really all that great. However, there is another wave coming off the coast of Africa. That may be something to watch here in the next 5 days. Something that's really interesting, hurricane or tropical climatology. Now, as we get to next week, about a week from now, actually, we get to August 15th. From that date on, 85% of all tropical systems develop. So we have a ton of time left and a lot of activity increasing here. You notice that peak, September 10th, we're ascending that big slope up to that peak on September 10th. So we're going to have to watch things closely. Now let's look at some modeling. And this is going to show you the global models, the European and the GFS. GFS will be in the yellow, European will be in the red, and when you see a closed off center, that is going to be either 93 or 94. So actually right here, this is 94, this is 93L. We're referencing the investigative areas, Invest 93, Invest 94. Going out in time, notice the models kind of drop 93L. There's no sort of development with that with these runs. However, 94L takes it into the Windward and Leeward Islands as we get on towards Tuesday morning, very, very early in the morning. Somewhat better organized. We'll see maybe a tropical depression at that point. Going farther out in the time to Wednesday afternoon, both models still have 94, somewhat developed. But if it does indeed take it over Dominican Republic, this is the home of Pico Duarte, the highest peak in the Caribbean. Geography-enhanced terrain and tropical systems don't exactly mix very well. So if, in fact, it does track over there, all bets are off that this even stays together afterwards. However, it's a small area compared to the general overall size of things. It could go north, it could go south, and it is being steered by a big ridge of high pressure to the north. That's why we're seeing that trend going west-northwest. So it's going to be something to keep an eye on. How about the ensembles? Now let's look at the GFS. The ensembles is the GFS model run a lot of times, several dozen times, tweaking the initial conditions a little bit, the initial variables. And what we get is pretty good consensus here all the way out, probably 3, 4, 5 days, and then we start to see a little bit more of a divergence there. But overall, it is sensing the high pressure ridge to the north, driving things generally off to the west-northwest. Now, I don't want you to look at this and say, we got to watch out, South Florida. We got a storm coming our way. This does not indicate intensity on this system as it heads north, okay? This could be a very weak system by the time it gets here and encounter land and really fall apart. But this just goes to show you that we're going to have to keep a close eye on 94L here as we go forward through the next 5 to 7 days. All the other tropical models, very, very similar here, taking it along that same general northwesterly trajectory. So I want you to take away from this is that hurricane season is starting to wake up. You know, we're getting into that peak of the season, activity becoming more common, and we're going to have more of these to track as we go forward, as we come off of very active hurricanes, the last hurricane seasons, the last couple of years. I want you to know you can reach out on social media if you have a question, something I talked about, something you want me to talk about in the next video. You can find me on social media, on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. We'll see you again tomorrow.